In 1984, father and daughter vanished on a road trip. 16 years later, police found this in a junkyard in the summer of 1984. John Miller, a kind-hearted and devoted father, decided to take his 10-year-old daughter, Emily, on a long road trip across the country. John had always been careful with his plans, making sure that everything was organized and safe. He worked as an accountant in their small town, living a quiet life, and he wanted to do something special for Emily before she grew too old to enjoy such adventures. Emily was a lively, curious girl who loved to explore, read stories about distant places, and dream about mountains, rivers, and forests she had never seen. This trip was a dream come true for both of them. The morning of their departure was filled with excitement. John had packed the car the night before, making sure that the luggage was organized, food was packed for the road, and maps were carefully placed on the dashboard. Emily helped by checking that her favorite toys and books were safely tucked into her bag. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she imagined the mountains, lakes, and cities they would visit. John smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. He knew the journey would be long, but he also knew it would create memories that Emily would carry with her for a lifetime. As they drove out of town, the streets were quiet, the morning sun casting long shadows on the road. People waved from their homes, curious to see the father and daughter leaving for such a long journey. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching familiar sights fade away, while John kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at her and smiling. Their conversations were filled with excitement and laughter, talking about the places they wanted to visit, the food they hoped to try, and the small adventures they imagined along the way. The bond between them was strong, filled with warmth, trust, and a deep understanding that only comes from years of shared life experiences. Their first stop was a small gas station about 50 miles from their town. John parked the car near the pumps, and Emily jumped out to stretch her legs. The gas station attendant greeted them warmly, noticing the cheerful mood of both. He offered a friendly smile as he watched Emily skip around the small lot, pointing at a few birds flying above. John filled the tank while keeping a watchful eye on his daughter. They chatted with the attendant, sharing a few laughs about the long journey ahead. Nothing seemed unusual. They appeared completely normal, happy, and ready for their adventure. It was a moment that would later be remembered as the last confirmed sighting of the father and daughter alive. As they continued their journey, the landscape changed. Rolling hills gave way to wide open plains, and the distant mountains began to rise on the horizon. Emily pressed her face to the window, gasping in awe at every new sight. John shared stories about the places they passed, telling her about history, nature, and the interesting people they might meet along the way. He wanted her to learn as much as possible, not just from books, but from seeing the world with her own eyes. Their conversations were filled with curiosity, laughter, and a sense of wonder that made the long hours of driving feel shorter. However, as the day turned into evening, a quiet tension began to settle over the journey. John noticed that the roads were becoming less traveled, with fewer cars and almost no signs of towns or settlements. Emily, though tired from the long day, continued to ask questions, her voice breaking the silence. John reassured her, telling her that the best views were often found in the most remote places. But deep inside, he felt a small unease. The world outside seemed too quiet, too empty, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the deserted road. Yet, he pushed the feeling aside, focusing on keeping Emily comfortable and cheerful. That night, they stopped at a small motel on the outskirts of a tiny town. John checked them in, choosing a room that overlooked a quiet street and a few distant hills. Emily was tired but excited to sleep in a new place. They had dinner at a nearby diner, enjoying burgers and milkshakes while talking about the next day's plans. John felt proud seeing Emily's enthusiasm. She drew small pictures of the mountains they planned to visit, her imagination running wild. After dinner, they returned to their room, and John made sure Emily was settled, reading her a story before turning off the light. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, believing that they were creating memories that would last forever. The next morning, they resumed their journey. John had planned a scenic route through the mountains, hoping Emily would see the beauty of nature firsthand. They stopped occasionally to take photographs, pick wildflowers, and watch small animals in the distance. Emily's laughter filled the air, and John felt a sense of peace, forgetting any lingering unease from the previous day. He was determined to make this trip perfect, and every small adventure along the way seemed to strengthen the bond between father and daughter. However, the joy of the journey was soon interrupted. After leaving a small town, they drove along a particularly isolated stretch of road. The landscape was beautiful but deserted, with no houses, gas stations, or other travelers in sight. Emily began to get restless, asking when they would reach the next town. John reassured her, telling her that sometimes the road itself is part of the adventure. But as the hours passed, their car developed a minor mechanical problem. The engine began to sputter, and John had to pull over to the side of the road. He opened the hood, examining the engine, while Emily sat in the car, watching him nervously. He tried to fix it, but the problem seemed more complicated than he expected. They were stranded, miles away from any town or help. John tried to remain calm, knowing that panicking would only scare Emily. He reassured her that everything would be fine, that help would arrive, or they would figure out a way to get the car moving again. Emily trusted her father completely, watching him work with wide, anxious eyes. Hours passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving them in a dim, shadowed landscape. John decided to walk along the road to look for assistance, leaving Emily in the car with instructions to stay put. He promised he would be back soon, holding her hand and giving her a hug before stepping out into the fading light. From that moment on, John and Emily seemed to vanish into thin air. They were never seen by anyone again. No passing car stopped, no wandering traveler reported seeing them, and no local resident remembered encountering them along that stretch of road. The gas station attendant, the motel staff, and the diner owners were the last to see them alive, each recalling their cheerful demeanor and excitement about the journey ahead. Their disappearance created an immediate stir in the community. Family members reported them missing, and police launched an investigation, but the trail went cold almost immediately. As days turned into weeks, the town grew anxious and fearful. The local police searched every possible location, from nearby forests to abandoned buildings along the highway. Flyers were distributed, radio announcements made, and neighbors helped in the search. Yet, despite their efforts, no trace of John or Emily was found. The disappearance became a mystery, puzzling everyone involved. Friends and family held onto hope, believing that somehow, they would be found alive. But as time passed, that hope began to fade, replaced by a heavy weight of uncertainty and grief. In the months following the disappearance, the story of John and Emily Miller became a cautionary tale in the town. People talked about it in hushed tones, wondering how a father and daughter could simply vanish without a trace. Rumors spread of possible accidents, kidnappers, or encounters with strangers along the isolated highway. Every lead was investigated, yet each seemed to end in disappointment. The community mourned quietly, leaving flowers and candles at the places they last knew John and Emily to be. Despite the growing despair, a small spark of hope remained in the hearts of those who loved them, a hope that one day, answers might be found. The disappearance of John and Emily left a permanent mark on their family and the community. Their story was one of love, hope, and sudden tragedy, a reminder of how fragile life could be, even in seemingly ordinary moments. John had intended to give Emily a lifetime of memories in a single journey, and though their adventure ended tragically, the memory of their bond and the joy they shared would not be forgotten. The quiet roads, the empty gas stations, and the long, winding highways became silent witnesses to a mystery that would haunt the town for many years to come. The days after John and Emily's disappearance were filled with worry and confusion. When the police received the first missing persons report, They acted quickly, but the reality of 1984 made the investigation much more difficult than it might be today. Technology was limited, there were no cell phones, no GPS tracking, and no surveillance cameras on most highways. The officers had to rely on eyewitness accounts, phone calls to nearby towns, and physical searches. Despite their best efforts, the trail seemed to end almost immediately, leaving everyone frustrated and anxious. At first, the police followed the most logical leads. They checked the gas station where John and Emily were last seen, asking the attendant for every little detail he could remember. The attendant described their cheerful demeanor, the luggage they carried, and even the small conversation he had with John about their route. It seemed ordinary, friendly, and nothing out of place. Still, the police noted every detail carefully, hoping to find a clue that might guide them. They also contacted the motel where the Millers had stayed the night before, confirming that they had checked out and left in the morning. Each step seemed promising, but it ultimately led nowhere. Investigators then turned to the highways and roads the Millers were expected to travel. Teams searched for any sign of an accident, skid marks, abandoned vehicles, or anything unusual along the roadside. Volunteers from the community joined in, combing through forests, empty fields, and abandoned buildings. Despite hours of effort, they found no trace of John or Emily. It was as if the two had disappeared completely. The police even spoke to travelers who had passed through the area during the same days, but no one remembered seeing a father and daughter on that remote stretch of highway. Every lead ended in disappointment, and the mystery deepened. Rumors began to circulate in the town and nearby communities. Some suggested that the Millers might have been involved in an accident and their bodies were hidden somewhere. Others whispered about kidnappers or strangers lurking along the deserted roads. Every rumor created tension, fear, and speculation, but none provided concrete evidence. Friends and neighbors tried to remain hopeful, yet the lack of information was painful. John's wife, Emily's mother, was especially heartbroken. She could not understand why no one had seen anything unusual. Every day that passed without news made her anxiety grow, but she refused to give up hope. Local media also became involved. Newspapers published stories and photographs of John and Emily, urging anyone with information to come forward. Radio stations broadcast their disappearance, and a few television segments covered the story in hopes of reaching a wider audience. The townspeople followed the news closely, discussing every detail, analyzing every possibility, and sometimes arguing about the best theories. For many, the mystery of the Millers' disappearance became a daily topic of concern, and their absence created an emotional shadow over the community. People were deeply saddened, but the story also reminded them of the importance of helping each other and remaining vigilant. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to slow down. With no new leads and no sightings, the case gradually became cold. Police officers who had initially dedicated themselves to finding John and Emily were reassigned to other duties, though some continued to check old leads from time to time. The family tried to continue their lives, but the emotional pain never faded. John's wife refused to believe they were gone, hoping that someday they might return. Friends and neighbors held small vigils, leaving flowers and notes in areas they believed John and Emily might have passed. The town became a place where hope and despair existed side by side, and the memory of the father and daughter lingered in every conversation. The police occasionally revisited possible theories about what might have happened. One suggestion was that the Millers had suffered a car accident on a remote road and the vehicle had gone unnoticed. Another theory was that they might have encountered someone with bad intentions, such as a criminal or kidnapper. Some even speculated that they had chosen to disappear intentionally, though no evidence supported this. Every possibility was considered, but none led to real answers. It was a frustrating time for everyone involved, especially for the family who waited for news that never came. The uncertainty was worse than any conclusion because it left them in a constant state of fear and hope at the same time. Over the years, small incidents occasionally raised questions. People reported seeing a man and a young girl resembling John and Emily in distant towns, but these sightings were never verified. Sometimes, abandoned vehicles were discovered along highways, but they did not belong to the Millers. Each new lead gave a brief spark of hope, only to be extinguished when the details did not match. The investigation seemed like an endless cycle of anticipation and disappointment. Yet, the police never completely closed the case. They believed that keeping it open, even as a cold case, could eventually lead to answers. They documented everything carefully, recording all the tips, sightings, and rumors, knowing that one small detail could one day solve the mystery. The community also struggled to come to terms with the disappearance. Parents became more cautious about allowing their children to travel, especially along long stretches of isolated highways. Local schools talked about the importance of safety and awareness, using the Millers' story as an example. Even those who never knew John and Emily personally were affected by the tragedy. It became a story passed from one generation to the next, a reminder of how suddenly life can change and how important it is to pay attention to those around us. The memory of John and Emily's smiles, laughter, and excitement during that summer of 1984 remain vivid in the minds of many. For Emily's mother, every day was a struggle. She continued her life, working, caring for family, and maintaining hope, but the pain of not knowing what happened to her husband and daughter was overwhelming. She visited the locations they had last been seen, spoke with the police regularly, and attended community meetings about missing persons. Despite the years passing, she never gave up hope. The small glimmers of possible sightings kept her going, even when the odds seemed impossible. Her love for John and Emily was unwavering, and she refused to let their memory fade into silence. The town supported her, recognizing her courage and determination, and many people joined her in the search for answers, hoping to bring closure to a mystery that had haunted them for years. Meanwhile, the police occasionally received tips from distant towns and highways, suggesting new directions to search. Some were credible, while others were clearly mistaken, but every tip was taken seriously. Detectives revisited old leads, spoke with retired officers who had worked the case, and even consulted experts in missing persons cases. Advances in forensic techniques, even if limited at the time, were considered for future investigation. They understood that sometimes evidence could be discovered years later, and cases thought unsolvable could eventually be solved. This kept a small sense of hope alive in the hearts of those still searching for John and Emily. Over time, the story of John and Emily Miller became part of local legend. People remembered the cheerful father and daughter who set out on a summer road trip and vanished without a trace. Families would tell the story to their children, emphasizing the importance of safety, attentiveness, and helping each other. The story was no longer just about a disappearance, it became a lesson, a cautionary tale, and a reminder of the fragility of life. Yet, beneath the sadness and fear, a spark of hope endured. The community, the police, and Emily's mother all believed that one day, somehow, the truth would come to light, and the mystery of the Miller family would finally be solved. The years stretched on, but the memory of the Millers never faded. Friends and neighbors continued to leave flowers and notes at the gas station and along the highway where they were last seen. The town never forgot the cheerful smiles of John and Emily, nor the hope and joy they had carried with them on that summer road trip. Though the investigation had stalled and no answers had yet been found, everyone involved continued to believe that one day, the father and daughter would be remembered not just for their disappearance, but for the love, hope, and courage they inspired in the hearts of all who knew their story. The mystery remained unsolved, but the determination to find answers never died, and the story of John and Emily Miller continued to touch the hearts of everyone who heard it. As the years passed, the disappearance of John and Emily Miller remained a haunting presence in the lives of their family, friends, and the community. Time did not erase the worry or the unanswered questions, instead, it transformed them into a quiet, persistent ache that lingered in the background of everyday life. Emily's mother, Helen, continued to live in the same small town, holding on to hope while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. She worked hard to care for herself, her family, and her friends, but the absence of John and Emily left an emptiness that nothing could fill. Helen's days were a delicate balance between living life and holding on to hope. She would wake each morning with the thought that somehow, they might return. Every phone call, every knock at the door, made her heart race with anticipation, only to be met with disappointment again and again. Friends and neighbors offered support, visiting her regularly and helping with chores, but even their presence could not erase the grief she carried. She often found herself visiting the gas station where they had last been seen, sitting in her car and imagining what John and Emily might have been doing at that very moment, as though replaying their last day could somehow bring them back. The community, too, never forgot the Miller family. In small towns, stories like this have a way of embedding themselves in the collective memory. Teachers would sometimes speak of John and Emily in classrooms, emphasizing the importance of staying safe and being aware of surroundings. Parents would use their story to remind children of the fragile nature of life and the importance of family. Local newspapers occasionally revisited the story, publishing "Where Are They Now?" updates and reminding everyone that, even after years, the mystery had not been solved. It became a story not only of tragedy but also of resilience, a tale that taught people to value their loved ones and remain vigilant. Meanwhile, the police kept the case file open. Detectives who had worked the initial investigation still reviewed old reports, sometimes finding small details that might have been overlooked. They spoke to retired officers, revisited the areas surrounding the highways, and kept the public informed that the case was never closed. Each small tip, even if it seemed unlikely, was logged and investigated. They knew that even decades later, new evidence could appear, and what seemed like a cold trail might suddenly lead to answers. It was this cautious optimism that kept the hope alive, not just for the family, but for everyone involved in the search for John and Emily. Helen often reflected on the possibility that her husband and daughter might still be alive somewhere, lost or trapped in circumstances beyond anyone's control. She imagined them navigating strange towns, seeking help, and yearning to return home. She would sometimes write letters, even though she had no address to send them to, pouring her heart onto paper and speaking her hopes aloud. Friends found it heartbreaking but inspiring to see her determination. Helen's belief that John and Emily might one day return became a quiet symbol of resilience, a way for the town to remain connected to the story even as the years passed. During this time, the investigation occasionally sparked new interest because of small, curious incidents. Sometimes travelers would report seeing someone who resembled Emily in a nearby town or along highways in other states. Some sightings turned out to be false, while others remained unverified. Every lead was treated with care, no matter how unlikely it seemed. The police understood that missing persons cases are often unpredictable, and a breakthrough can happen years after the initial disappearance. This understanding gave Helen and the community a reason to remain cautiously hopeful, even when the days and years stretched on without answers. The passage of time also brought subtle changes to the town and the surroundings where John and Emily had last been seen. Roads were widened, new buildings were constructed, and old landmarks were replaced. Yet, some areas remained untouched, silent witnesses to the events of 1984. The highways, forests, and roadside areas where they had vanished seemed to hold a quiet, watchful presence, as if the land itself remembered the cheerful father and daughter who had passed through so many years ago. For those who lived nearby, these unchanged places were reminders that some mysteries remain, no matter how much time moves forward. Helen found herself connecting with other families who had experienced disappearances. She shared her story at local gatherings and listened to the struggles of others, realizing that her grief, while profound, was not unique. Each family she met offered support, understanding, and advice, helping her carry the weight of her own experience. They discussed ways to keep memories alive, how to handle uncertainty, and the importance of staying involved with authorities even when hope seemed dim. This network became a lifeline, providing Helen with a sense of purpose and community, reminding her that she was not alone in her struggle to find answers. Through these years, the town itself held onto the memory of John and Emily in small ways. Local events, charity drives, and community programs sometimes included reminders of the missing father and daughter. People would leave flowers or notes in quiet corners of the highways, and small memorials were maintained at the gas station and the motel where they had last been seen. Children who grew up hearing the story of John and Emily would ask questions, learning about the importance of safety, kindness, and community awareness. Their disappearance, while tragic, had left an imprint on the town that would last for generations, shaping the way people viewed their surroundings and the safety of those they loved. Despite the lack of progress, Helen continued to believe in eventual closure. She remained in contact with law enforcement, providing any information she could remember and reviewing case files to ensure nothing had been overlooked. Each small discovery, whether a piece of evidence or a witness tip, gave her a spark of hope. She would carefully examine photographs, notes, and maps, sometimes retracing the Millers' planned route in her mind, imagining where they might have gone and what they might have experienced. This mental journey was both comforting and painful, allowing her to stay connected to John and Emily even as time passed. The police, too, never abandoned the case. They documented each tip, investigated every lead, and remained aware that advances in technology might one day provide answers. New forensic methods, including DNA testing and better identification techniques, offered the possibility that decades-old cases could be solved. Detectives periodically revisited the areas where John and Emily had last been seen, examining abandoned buildings, roadside areas, and even junkyards that had expanded over the years. They knew that sometimes evidence surfaces years later, hidden in places no one would expect. This ongoing diligence kept the hope alive that one day, the mystery might finally be resolved. Through all of this, Helen's love for her family never wavered. She cherished memories of John and Emily, their laughter, curiosity, and the summer road trip they had planned together. She clung to these memories, sharing them with friends and neighbors, ensuring that the father and daughter were not forgotten. The emotional toll was immense, but her resilience became a source of inspiration. The community admired her strength, recognizing that while the absence of John and Emily was deeply painful, the love she carried for them remained undiminished. It was a love that transcended years, sustaining her even in the darkest moments of uncertainty. By the time more than a decade had passed since the disappearance, the story of John and Emily Miller had become a legend in the town. People still spoke of them with a mix of sadness and hope. Their story served as a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of family, and the enduring power of hope. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, members of the community would pause to remember them, leaving flowers and notes at the roadside memorials. Though no answers had yet been found, the bond between the family, the town, and the memory of John and Emily continued to grow stronger with time. Even in the silence of their absence, John and Emily had left a mark. Their disappearance inspired vigilance, kindness, and community support. People became more aware of strangers, more careful with loved ones, and more willing to help those in need. The mystery of their vanishing created a legacy that went beyond grief. It reminded everyone that life is precious and that even in the darkest moments, hope and resilience can endure. Helen's determination, the efforts of the police, and the memory of John and Emily continued to shape the town, keeping the story alive and ensuring that one day, the truth might finally be discovered. The years stretched on, but the hope of finding John and Emily never faded. Helen continued her visits to the gas station, the highway, and the places they had last been seen. She maintained contact with law enforcement, followed news reports, and never let go of the possibility that answers might come. The town, too, remained vigilant, ensuring that the memory of the father and daughter endured. Though time had passed, the story of John and Emily Miller remained a living, breathing mystery, one that inspired hope, compassion, and the belief that even the longest unsolved cases could eventually find resolution. 16 years had passed since John and Emily Miller vanished on that summer road trip, and the case had remained a haunting mystery. The town had aged with them, roads had been widened, buildings had been constructed, and new families had moved in, but the memory of the father and daughter lingered, a quiet presence that no one could forget. Helen, Emily's mother, now older and weathered by years of uncertainty, never stopped hoping for answers. She kept the case alive, still speaking with the police, reviewing old reports, and occasionally receiving tips that offered brief flickers of possibility. Most of these tips led nowhere, but the smallest spark of hope was enough to sustain her through the long years. One ordinary morning, in a small town not far from the highway where the Millers had disappeared, a junkyard owner made a discovery that would finally break the case wide open. The junkyard had grown over the years, expanding into fields that had once been empty. Rusted cars, broken appliances, and piles of old tires created a chaotic landscape, a place where anything could be hidden from sight. The owner had been organizing some storage areas, clearing spaces for new inventory, when he noticed something unusual. Beneath a heap of old car parts and debris, there were belongings that looked remarkably like the descriptions in the missing persons reports from 16 years earlier. He called the police immediately, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The officers who arrived quickly cordoned off the area, carefully documenting everything they found. Among the items were old suitcases, clothing, and personal belongings that matched descriptions of John and Emily's possessions. Photographs, books, and even a few toys were found, each item carefully preserved under layers of dirt and neglect. For the investigators, it was the moment they had been waiting for, a breakthrough after years of dead ends and unanswered questions. The atmosphere was tense and quiet, filled with the weight of anticipation and disbelief. Forensic experts were brought in to examine the site. They worked meticulously, carefully uncovering evidence and collecting samples for testing. Human remains were found hidden among the debris, and preliminary examinations suggested a direct connection to the Millers. DNA testing, which had advanced significantly since 1984, allowed experts to confirm the identities with certainty. For the first time in 16 years, the mystery had an answer: John and Emily Miller had been found. The news spread quickly, first among law enforcement, then through the community, and finally to Helen, who had spent every day holding on to the hope that this moment would one day arrive. When Helen received the news, her emotions were overwhelming. Relief, grief, anger, and sorrow all collided in a wave of intensity. She had long hoped for answers, but the reality of the discovery was more painful than she had imagined. Tears flowed freely as she processed the fact that her husband and daughter had been gone all these years, hidden from the world in a place no one had ever thought to search. Yet, alongside the sorrow, there was a sense of closure, a resolution to a mystery that had haunted her for decades. She could now begin the process of mourning fully, knowing the truth rather than living in endless uncertainty. The police began reconstructing the events that might have led to the Millers' fate. While the exact circumstances remained unclear, patterns began to emerge. Investigators concluded that the father and daughter likely met with foul play shortly after leaving the last town where they had been seen. The isolated stretch of highway, the deserted roads, and the quiet landscape all pointed to the possibility of an encounter with criminals or an accident that was deliberately covered up. Evidence suggested that the items found in the junkyard had been deliberately hidden, making the case both a tragedy and a mystery that had endured far longer than anyone could have imagined. The community reacted with a mix of shock, sadness, and relief. For years, neighbors had wondered what had happened to John and Emily, imagining countless scenarios in their minds. Now, with the evidence uncovered, they could finally understand that the mystery had not been a story of escape or disappearance but a tragic end that had remained hidden for far too long. Local media reported the discovery extensively, telling the story of the Millers' disappearance, the years of waiting, and the eventual breakthrough. People who had grown up hearing the story felt a mixture of sorrow and closure, understanding the depth of the tragedy while appreciating the diligence of those who never gave up searching. Helen, while devastated, began the long process of coping with the truth. She visited the police station to see the evidence, carefully examined photographs, and spoke with detectives about the findings. Each detail, while heartbreaking, gave her a better understanding of what had happened to John and Emily. The knowledge allowed her to honor their memory more fully, rather than living in endless uncertainty. Friends and family gathered around her, offering support and comfort. The town also came together to acknowledge the loss, paying respects and leaving flowers and notes in places that had been significant to the Millers' journey. For the police, the discovery reinforced the importance of persistence in missing persons cases. They reflected on how many times small tips, overlooked details, and advances in technology could make the difference between a case remaining unsolved and being resolved. The junkyard, seemingly ordinary and forgotten, had become the key to unlocking a long-standing mystery. The discovery emphasized that evidence could surface even decades later, and that the work of investigators, combined with the support of the community, could eventually lead to answers. It was a powerful reminder of the persistence required in solving such difficult cases. The forensic examination continued for several weeks, carefully analyzing each item and tracing every detail. Experts documented clothing fibers, personal items, and skeletal remains to create a comprehensive picture of the final moments of John and Emily's life. Although the exact sequence of events might never be fully known, the evidence suggested a tragic end, a conclusion that had remained hidden for 16 long years. Each discovery, each piece of evidence, brought clarity to a story that had been clouded in mystery, providing a sense of resolution for the family and the community. Helen began holding small memorials to honor John and Emily. She invited neighbors, friends, and anyone affected by the disappearance to join her in remembering their lives. Photographs were displayed, stories were shared, and tears were shed, but there was also a quiet sense of healing. The community, once haunted by uncertainty, now had the opportunity to grieve fully and offer support to Helen. The memory of the Millers became a symbol of love, resilience, and the power of hope. Though their lives had ended tragically, the story of their bond and the eventual discovery allowed people to celebrate who they were, rather than focusing solely on the sadness of their passing. Even as the town mourned, there was a renewed awareness about safety, vigilance, and the importance of reporting suspicious activity. The story of John and Emily became a cautionary tale, reminding people to remain aware of their surroundings and to take precautions during travel. Parents spoke with their children about the importance of staying together, asking for help when needed, and trusting instincts. Schools and community organizations used the story to educate people about the fragility of life and the importance of community support in times of crisis. The tragedy, while devastating, ultimately helped the town grow stronger and more connected. For Helen, the discovery, while painful, offered a path toward closure. She could finally mourn openly, understanding what had happened rather than living in endless uncertainty. Each visit to the site where the items were discovered reminded her of John and Emily, allowing her to reflect on their lives, their bond, and the joy they had shared in the months leading up to the trip. She began to write letters to them, not as messages of hope for a return, but as expressions of love and remembrance. These letters became a form of therapy, helping her process grief and honor their memory in a way that was meaningful and personal. The police, Helen, and the community continued to piece together the timeline and the evidence from the junkyard. Though many details remained a mystery, the discovery answered the most pressing question: what had happened to John and Emily Miller? Their disappearance, once a source of endless speculation and fear, was now a tragic but resolved chapter. The story of their bond, the joy of their journey, and the tragedy of their final days became a powerful narrative about love, loss, and the importance of never giving up hope. The discovery also reminded everyone that even the smallest leads, no matter how long ago they occurred, can lead to breakthroughs. Evidence hidden in plain sight, forgotten by time, or overlooked in the initial investigation could still reveal the truth. It was a powerful lesson for law enforcement, families, and the community. Persistence, vigilance, and hope can bring answers, even after many years. The story of John and Emily Miller, once a mystery that seemed impossible to solve, had finally reached a conclusion, offering closure to a family and a community that had never stopped searching for the truth. After the shocking discovery in the junkyard, life for Helen, the family, and the community began to change. 16 years of unanswered questions and endless worry had finally come to an end. While the pain of knowing that John and Emily Miller had met a tragic fate was immense, there was also a sense of relief. The uncertainty that had haunted Helen for so long was finally replaced with answers. She could now understand what had happened and begin the process of truly mourning her husband and daughter, instead of living in the limbo of hope and fear. The closure allowed her to grieve openly, to remember, and to honor them in ways she had been unable to do for so many years. Helen spent the days following the discovery visiting the site of the junkyard, where the evidence had been found. Police officers guided her carefully through the area, explaining what had been uncovered and what it meant. Each piece of evidence told part of the story, from the belongings to the remains themselves. Though it was difficult to face the reality of their deaths, she felt that seeing these things gave her a connection to John and Emily, a way to bring them closer to her even though they were gone. She began leaving flowers and small notes at the site, marking it as a place of remembrance and reflection, and it became a personal sanctuary where she could process her grief. The community also felt the impact of the discovery. People who had lived through the mystery for years were finally able to understand what had happened. For many, it was a moment of closure, a time to reflect on the importance of family, community, and the power of perseverance. Local media reported the story extensively, sharing the journey of the Millers' disappearance and the eventual breakthrough. Neighbors who had once shared rumors and speculations now found a way to come together to honor the family. Vigils were held, and memorials were established at places significant to John and Emily, like the gas station where they were last seen and the old motel along the highway. The town collectively remembered their smiles, laughter, and the joy they had shared on that summer trip so long ago. Helen also found comfort in speaking with law enforcement officers who had worked on the case. She listened as they explained the investigation, the leads that had come in over the years, and how modern forensic techniques had finally allowed them to identify the remains. The officers expressed their regret that it had taken so long, but they also emphasized their determination never to give up on finding the truth. Their dedication reassured Helen that John and Emily had been cared for, even if the answers had taken years to arrive. It reminded her that persistence and patience, though often difficult, could eventually bring justice and resolution. As she continued her mourning, Helen began to share the story of John and Emily with others, not just as a tale of tragedy, but as one of love, resilience, and hope. She spoke to school children about the importance of safety, paying attention to one's surroundings, and valuing family. She met with other families who had experienced similar losses, offering comfort and guidance. By telling the story of the Millers, Helen ensured that their memory lived on, turning a painful experience into a lesson for others. She emphasized that while life could be unpredictable and sometimes cruel, love and remembrance were powerful forces that could sustain people through even the darkest times. The police continued their work, piecing together the events leading up to the Millers' disappearance. While some details remained uncertain, they reconstructed a timeline based on the evidence recovered from the junkyard. Investigators concluded that John and Emily had likely encountered foul play soon after leaving the last town where they were seen, and that their belongings had been deliberately hidden. Although the circumstances of their deaths were tragic, the discovery provided vital answers, showing that even cold cases could eventually be resolved with dedication and modern technology. It served as a reminder to law enforcement, families, and communities that hope should never be abandoned. In the months following the discovery, Helen established small memorials in honor of John and Emily. Friends, neighbors, and members of the community visited regularly, leaving flowers, photographs, and small personal items. These memorials became places of reflection and remembrance, allowing the town to collectively honor the father and daughter who had once brought so much joy and mystery into their lives. Children who had grown up hearing about the Millers were invited to participate in remembrance events, learning not only about the tragedy but also about empathy, kindness, and community responsibility. The story of John and Emily Miller became an enduring legacy, teaching lessons that extended far beyond their disappearance. Helen also took the time to personally reflect on her own journey. She realized that the 16 years without answers had been a period of profound growth and endurance. She had learned patience, resilience, and the importance of maintaining hope even in the darkest circumstances. The grief she experienced was intense, but it had also strengthened her, teaching her to appreciate small moments, to cherish memories, and to value the relationships she still had. By facing the reality of John and Emily's fate, she was able to transform her grief into a form of strength, using their memory as motivation to live fully and honor their lives. The discovery of John and Emily also impacted the town in more subtle ways. Residents became more aware of the importance of community vigilance, reporting unusual activity, and staying connected to one another. The story reminded everyone that even ordinary places like highways, gas stations, and small motels could hold secrets, and that paying attention to details mattered. The tragedy and eventual resolution strengthened bonds within the community, creating a shared sense of responsibility and care. In remembering John and Emily, the town learned valuable lessons about human connection, the fragility of life, and the power of persistence. As Helen continued to grieve and heal, she began writing letters to John and Emily. These letters were not messages expecting a reply but rather expressions of love, remembrance, and reflection. She described her daily life, shared her feelings, and recounted memories of happier times. Writing became a way to maintain a connection to the family she had lost, to honor their lives, and to find solace in the process of remembrance. Friends and neighbors often joined her in these reflective practices, sharing their own memories and stories, creating a collective tribute that strengthened the bond of the community and celebrated the lives of John and Emily. The story of John and Emily Miller also served as an important lesson for law enforcement and families alike. It demonstrated that even cases that seem unsolvable can eventually be resolved through persistence, technology, and careful attention to details. It reminded everyone involved that missing persons investigations should never be abandoned, no matter how much time has passed. Each piece of evidence, every tip, and every lead, no matter how small, can be crucial in finding answers. The case became an example of the importance of diligence, patience, and hope, inspiring investigators to continue their work with renewed determination in other cold cases. In the end, Helen found a sense of peace she had never imagined possible. While she would always mourn the loss of John and Emily, she was able to celebrate their lives, remembering the love they shared and the joy they brought during their journey. She visited the memorials, attended remembrance events, and shared their story with anyone who would listen. The grief remained, but it was accompanied by acceptance and the knowledge that the truth, finally revealed, allowed her to move forward. She had spent 16 years waiting for answers, and now that they had come, she could honor John and Emily fully, embracing their memory in a meaningful and lasting way. The community, too, benefited from the closure. Families learned about the importance of vigilance, kindness, and supporting one another during difficult times. Children grew up knowing the story, not just as a tragedy but as a lesson in empathy, perseverance, and love. The highway, the junkyard, and the small towns where the Millers had traveled became part of a shared history, remembered with reverence and care. The story of John and Emily Miller, once a source of fear and speculation, became a narrative of remembrance, hope, and the enduring power of family and community bonds. In reflecting on the journey, Helen often spoke of the summer road trip they had planned so long ago. She remembered John's smile, Emily's laughter, and the joy they had shared on the road. While the ending had been tragic, the memories of those happy moments provided comfort and inspiration. Helen understood that their lives, though cut short, had left a lasting impact on everyone who had known them or heard their story. The disappearance and eventual discovery became a testament to the enduring nature of love, hope, and remembrance, showing that even in the darkest tragedies, meaning and connection could be found. Ultimately, the story of John and Emily Miller concluded with a mixture of grief, reflection, and resilience. The family, the community, and law enforcement all learned lessons about hope, patience, and the importance of never giving up. Helen, while forever changed by the tragedy, found a way to honor her husband and daughter, keeping their memory alive and meaningful. The discovery in the junkyard brought closure, allowed mourning, and created a lasting tribute to a father and daughter whose lives, though brief, had touched so many. Their story would continue to be remembered, not just as a mystery solved, but as a reminder of love, perseverance, and the enduring human spirit.